side, they'll be from Mathis, Victoria, Oldham, all different kinds of places. And I'm sure I probably left one out, and there's probably some other people that'll be watching. But the main thing about it is I remember when I was your age, and I was coming to these things. And the best part about it was the fact that I got to see people from other areas that I didn't normally see. And so while we can't do that, at least the very most that we can do is make sure we're praising God when we're doing that. That was the exciting thing that got us, but the most important thing is that we're here. Now, when you talk about value of God, and that's the topic, it's understanding our value. And so forgive me for the rest, but I'll probably be focusing most of my attention right here. And so if you understand what value is, now think about this. If you were to have, if I asked you a question, if there was a fire at your place, hopefully that's not the case, but if there was a fire at your place, what would be the one thing that you'd grab? Now, some people would say, and I've asked this a lot, some people say, well, I'd probably want whatever gaming station is the latest. Okay, I got you. And then some people say, well, I'm going to have my phone. I got to have my phone. And some people may say, well, I would take, my little pet. Well, I would assume that every living thing would be out of the house. But some people have said, I'd take my pet. Some even adults have said they would take their pet. And they had kids, so I don't know what that means. But for you guys, what would you take? Now, you don't answer. Just think about it. What would you take? Because that right there is what you value most. And so for me, the one thing, every time I think about that question, this is what I take right here. This is it. This is the reason why we're here. This would be it. Because this, when you want to understand your value to God, then you look at the Bible. And so I'm hoping I can share with you some things today that will cause you to want to take a closer examination of what's in here. Because there's some great things in here. And so if you have your Bible, I hope you look at the pew beside you. If you didn't bring one, in front of you, behind you, or if you have your own, and turn to Psalm 18. I want you to look at Psalm 18 because this, and we're going to look at a couple Psalms. Because if you want to know your value, then I think we could start right here. Now, during this time, when this is taking place, there's a manhunt for David's life. And he's pinning this, and I don't know if he's pinning this while it's going on or just after it took place. It's really possible it took just after it took place or maybe after he was enthroned as king. But he mentions the same song that he sings in 2 Samuel 22. And it seems as he's an old man here, reciting the value that God had placed on him. And so if you want to understand our value to God, I think we can look here and we can see some glimpses of how important you really are. I think a lot of times you think about the things you value. The world says a certain thing, and God says something else. The world says the things you value, man, you got to have those shoes. Whatever the shoe is, you got to have those shoes. You got to have certain clothes. You have to have certain things. It's all about the things. But God says something different. Now, look in verse 1. I'm reading from the English Standard Version, and it says, I love you, O Lord my God. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised, and I am saved from my enemies. Now that right there is a nutshell of the whole thing that takes place. But here, we're going to see some things. Look at verse 6. It says, in my distress. You ever been stressed out? Maybe you got a lot of chores at the house to do. Maybe it's just school. It's just impacted you. All those different things. And so you look at it, and sometimes you're fed up with whatever it is. And he says, in my distress, I called upon the Lord. To God, to my God, I cried for help. From his temple, he heard my voice. That's the first thing we need to know about God. He hears. He hears when you're talking to him.
That's right.
He wants you to talk to him. And so I want you to think, when's the last time you prayed to God? And if it hasn't been a while, think about maybe when's the last time when you on a regular basis pray, more than just when you went to bed. Or when you're around family and you're praying before a meal. When's the last time you just sat there and said, I'm going to talk to God because I want to. Because he wants to hear from you. He is saying right here, I distressed. He's like, am I distressed? I called you, and you listen. Now that's what you want to hear, right? When you're stressed out, when you have a lot going on, when you're asking for help, you want a response, don't you? That's what he gets. Because he says, you heard my voice. So he hears us. And now it's interesting. There's got this manhunt. People are after David. And so here's what happens when you mess with one of God's. And so this is what happens when you're messed with. It says, then the earth reeled and rocked. Now think about this in cartoon, all right? So this is what I think about in a cartoon, because I can't imagine all this really happening as far as the amazing things that God did to rescue David time and time again. But in my imagination, I'm just seeing everything rock in this type cartoon type thing. And it says the foundations of the earth trembled and quaked because he was angry. And then it makes me think of a cartoon character when they get mad and smoke blows from their ears. Well, here it says smoke went from his nostrils. It's just, and just smoke is coming out because somebody's messing with his.
That's right.
And he takes it that serious. And he says it quaked because he was angry. Smoke rose from his nostrils and devoured the fire from his mouth. Glowing coals flamed forth from him. He bowed the heavens and came down. Thick darkness was under his feet, and he rode the cherub and flew. And cherub means that's plural, so there's more than one. So he flew and he rose, and it says he swiftly on the wings of the wind, he made darkness his comforting. So the people that are enemies of God and his people didn't even see it coming. There was a covering, they couldn't even see it, and it says his canopy around him, thick clouds, dark with water. Out of the brightness before him, hailstones and coals of fire broke through the clouds. I mean, we're having this image that everything is falling apart for those that go against God, because he values those that follow him. And so as we continue on, we see that, man, he hears. And the one thing we see from verse 9, it says, and he came down. And I want you to think about that for a second, because we're going to hit that a little bit later on. But he comes down to rescue David. And then in verse 16, it says, he set me on a high. He set me on high. He took me and drew me out of the many waters. He rescues. And he rescued me from my strong enemy, from those who hated me. And so we see here how you're valued. He hears you. He comes for you, and he rescues you. And then it gets even better, because here we see the reason why he does it. In verse 19, it says, he brought me out into a broad place. He rescued me. Once again, he's just saying, this is what happened. And he says, because he delights in me. That's how he feels. He delights in you. He is so in love with you. He delights in you. And it says he came down, right? If you looked and you just made a middle note of Romans chapter 5, verse 6, at just the right time, Christ came down to rescue us. But now, if that wasn't enough, and you just said, yeah, I understand, he hears me, he'll come, he'll rescue me because he delights in me, I get it. But now, it gets a little bit deeper. Because go to Psalm 139. Psalm 139. And it becomes a little bit more personal. Here, David, in Psalm 139, saying the same type of thing. It's David talking by inspiration. And in 139, it goes down and it says, we'll start in verse 1. It says, O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. And that's an amazing thing. If you value something, you know it, right? If there's something that you value, you know everything about it. Every detail about it. You know, I was a Dallas Cowboy fan when I was young, and so I knew everything about the team. I could tell you how many yards, I could tell you what the record was, I could tell you all those things because I valued the Dallas Cowboys. Well, God says he values this. You. That's who. And so he says right here, you have searched me and you know me. Now think about that. You've probably had some friends that got a chance to know you, and you've had a chance to get to know some friends, and sometimes those friendships have just dissolved, right? But God didn't feel that same way. It doesn't dissolve with him. He knows you. He searches you, and he's still in love with you. Because remember, just at the right time, Jesus came down to die for us when we were still sinners. And so, here he goes on. It says in verse 2, you know when I sit down and when I rise up. Now, doesn't that sound like you folks? Because they kind of know what's going on without you ever telling them, right? I mean, they know when you're doing something to your sibling and you're not supposed to. I can't tell you how many times I got in trouble with my mom, and I was walking, and mom would say, Michael, what? I'd stop. And I'd walk away because I was doing something I wasn't supposed to be doing. You know, it's amazing the ears she could hear when I opened the refrigerator door. Well, you're going to run your supper, not yet. And I'd have to close it. So he knows everything, more so than the superpower that moms have. He knows you. He searches you. He knows when you sit up and when you rise. It says, you discern my thoughts from afar. He knows what you're thinking. You only know that if something's important to you and you're important to God. It says, you search out my path and my lying down. You are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue. Now, you know some people are pretty good at finishing your sentence. He knows the sentence before you ever start the sentence. Because he knows your thoughts. It says, behold the Lord, you know it all together. You hemmed me in, behind and before. So he's all around us. You lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high and I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? And that's the first thing we need to know. He delights in us, and we know because of this verse right here. He never leaves us. He's always present. He's always there for you. When you're at school and you feel like you're the only one that believes the way you believe. When you feel like you're the only one standing. When you feel like you're the only one going through what you're going through, it says his presence is all around you. You can't escape from where he is, because he's everywhere. He delights in you. And it says, if I ascend to the heaven, you're there. If I make my bed shallow, you're there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the utmost parts of the sea, even there your hand will lead me. And your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and light all about my night. And the light about me be night. Even the darkness is not dark for you. When you were little, I know I was scared of the dark. I was probably, maybe it's still something for you, but I was scared of the dark. But we have a God that's beyond that. That's right. Darkness is not a big thing for him. There is no fear in him. He created everything. He knows everything. His presence is always there. And then it says this in verse 13. You formed my innermost parts, or my inward parts, as my version says. And you knit me together in my mother's womb. So there's power put in you because God took patience with you, taking his time. It says he knit you together. Now you think about knitting. Have you ever knitted something? Now I don't know if you have. I have. But I've seen people knit. That's about as close as I've gone to it. And when people knit, they don't just sit there and kind of do this. You know, they sit there and they take their time making sure everything is just precise. There's a pattern they're following. They're going to get it just precision to make it perfect. Well, that's what God did with us. He made you exactly the way he wanted you to be made. We've got people, they're trying to straighten hair and trying to curl hair if they have straight hair. We have people trying to have different hair colors. We have different people trying to do different things about the outward appearance. He made you exactly the way he wanted you. He's in love with you. He delights in you.
That's right.
And so sometimes you got people in school that think that you aren't good enough the way God made you. Here he says something totally different. If you want to know your value, look at what he said. He said, he knit you together in your mother's womb. He took his time with you. And it keeps going. It says, I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made, in verse 14. Wonderful are your works, my soul knows it very well. So now, not only is his presence with you always, his power is on you, or in you, because he made you. And then, his pleasure is in you. Because you are fearfully and wonderfully made. You would be the masterpiece. Right? Ephesians chapter 2 verse 10 says you were created as his workmanship, created for good works. You are his masterpiece. And so knowing that you're fearfully and wonderfully made, he made you the way he wanted you. And trust me, if that weren't true, I'd have been really sad, because when I was growing up, I was the shortest guy in my class. And I just wanted to grow. If I could stretch myself out, I would have done so. Well, I'm still not tall. But he made me exactly the way he wanted me. And sometimes we look at the things that we aren't instead of the things that we are. And he made us wonderful. And we need to relish that. The fact that God has placed a value on us. We're so important to him. He delights in us. When we talk, he listens.
That's right.
He doesn't just listen. He has action behind it. He comes to our rescue. Time and time again, he delights in us. Because his presence is always with us. And his power is proven because you're here today. Because he knit you when he was forming you in your mother's womb. And his pleasure is in you because you're fearfully and wonderfully made. And then it says, my frame, in verse 15, my frame was not hidden from you, for when I was made in secret. And he goes on, and look at verse 16. My eyes saw my unformed substance. Your eyes, saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there were none of them. So he's got a plan for you. That's the amazing thing. He's got a plan for each one of you. And if you looked over in Acts chapter 17, 26 and 27, Paul is teaching. And he's teaching to a group of people who don't even know who God is. He says, well, let me tell you about a God that I know. This one that you have marked and says to an unknown God, let me tell you a little bit more about it. And in verse 26, it says, he determined the periods and the boundaries in which men live. That means he's determined the times and the places for people to live. So that perhaps they would reach out to him and find him, even though he's not very far from either one of us. And so he's determined the times and places. So this would be the best opportunity for you to find him, even though he's not far. And we know from Matthew chapter 7, verse 7, if we ask, it'll be given. If we seek, we'll find. And if we knock, the door will be open. And so he says, if you seek, I've set you up. So if you seek me, you're going to find me. He has set you up for spiritual success. You know, you can set yourself up for failure or success. And he says, I've given you everything to look at right here. This is yours. All you have to do is get to know me. This is how we get to know him. I want you to talk to me. God says, I'm always listening to you. And I answer prayers that are according to my word, according to my will, is what 1 John chapter 5, 13 and following states. And his will is for you to be saved, and become more like him. And so, looking at that, the fact that we know he delights in us. He's got a plan. You don't do anything that you don't care. You don't have a plan. That means you don't care about it. But if you've got a plan, it means you care about it. He's got a plan for each one of you. And his plan was to have you here in 2020 in Beeville, Texas. So perhaps you'd reach out to him, even though he's not far from either one of you. And so I want to take a time to look over at look over at Mark. Mark chapter 14. Because now that's how God feels about us. And so we know in Romans chapter 5, 6 and following, it says, at just the right time, God sent his son. While we were still sinners, he sent his son. Because his value, there's no limit to how he values you. Because he ends up sending his son. And then at this point, I think it's pretty interesting. Because if you look at Mark chapter 14, we're going to look at the last 12 hours of Jesus' life. And then this lesson is going to end up being yours. But chapter 14 and 15 is amazing. Because if you look in chapter 14, verse 32, it says he's in Gethsemane. And there, in verse 33, he has Peter, James, and John. So you know anytime these three guys are with him, something big's going to happen. And he sits there and he says, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. I'm overwhelmed. Well, here he is, and let's just see all the things that he's gone through, because that's going to show you how he values you. You already know how God does. But now, what about Jesus? 12 hours of his life were tough. And that's not even talking about the other years that he spent on this earth, how difficult those were. Because after all, when you leave heaven, everything's bad. Even a great day on earth is bad compared to heaven. And so here it says he's so sad. He'd just rather die. So he's going through this because he values you. He knows the only way to get you to him forever is for him to die on the cross. And so he does. And so it says he's so sad. So he is so sad here as he's praying, hey, come up with another plan, but if there's not another plan, I'll do it. And what another plan? And so he does it. And at the point, in verse 42, he says, arise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. And we all know who that is, right? Judas, right? And so Judas comes betraying him. Now, after all, this is one of his buddies. This is a friend, one of the guys he chose to spend 3 or 3.5 years with him. And so his friend is betraying him. If you've been betrayed by a friend, you know how he feels, don't you? And so here he goes through that betrayal, knowing at the very beginning when he chose him what Judas would do. And I know he's going to betray me, but I'm going to choose him. And then he goes on. All the guys that were with him said, man, we're never going to leave you. They were eating in an upper room and they said that. They walk out to the garden. He prays. All of a sudden, the betrayer comes and they go to arrest him. And then everybody takes off in verse 50. Everybody flees. Man, all your buddies. Ever been deserted by your friends? Man, if you have, you know how Jesus feels. And he's still doing it because he's in love with you. One guy is so bad in verse 51, it says they grab him and he slips through his, they grab his clothes, he slips out of those clothes and he runs naked. Now, I wanted to be, sometimes I'm sure some people want to be away from me, but no one's ever wanted to be away from me so bad. They just run through the streets of Beeville naked. But this guy did. Wanted to get away from Jesus so badly. The Son of God, the Savior. He's dealing with that because he's in love with you. And he did that because he's in love with those guys too.
That's right.
Even though they're going to break his heart. And sometimes you've broken his heart. And he's still in love with you because he values you. You are his delight. He finds pleasure in you. And then, as it keeps going, they get him before the Sanhedrin, the religious court of the day. And in verse 56, it says they bore false witnesses against him. Meaning they lied about it. You ever been lied about? People say stuff that's not true. Oh, you know how that feels, right? No matter what you say, they're going to believe it. And if you defend it, they're going to say, see. And if you don't defend yourself, they're going to say, see. Either way, you're wrong. Jesus went through that for you. Being lied about, and he didn't say a thing about it. He just stood there and took it for you. He values you. As it keeps going, in verse 65, anybody ever spit on you? Because he spit on him. They're abusing him. You think of every which way, we won't get into it, but every which way a person can be abused, Jesus was abused. They ended up taking his clothes off and casting lots for him. Man, in a time period where you cover it all up, not like some of the people that are out there in Padre Island, you're covered up. And that is very immodest not to be covered up. And sometimes people don't understand that today. Man, that's sexual abuse right there. You talk about neglect. They all left him, deserted. All the different ways you can think about it. And here we've got physical abuse. We're going to have mental abuse because they're going to blindfold him. We're going to hit him and say, hey, who hit you? So you think about being abused, man, he's dealt with it. Friends and people that you've heard about have to deal with being abused. Well, Jesus knew it was going to happen. He still did. Because he values you. As it goes on, his closest friend, because those 3 guys I told you about, Peter, James, and John. Peter, in verse 66, he starts acting like, I don't even know who he is. I don't even know. Well, yeah, you're with him. You're that Galilean. Don't know. Yeah, sure he is. Because, think about the accent, Nope. He denies it 3 times, as you know, right? 3 times. His closest friends denied him 3 times. And he's still going on that cross. And he's still doing it because he values you.
That's right.
He's in love with you. But think about how we show him that we love him. Because sometimes I think we don't do a good job of doing that. And show him that we appreciate him. In chapter 15, it says they put, in verse 19, they put a robe around him. They were spitting on him some more. In verse 17, they put a purple robe. They twisted a crown of thorns on him. It says then, in verse 20, after they mocked him. So all this is just to make fun of him. If you've ever been made fun of, to hurt your feelings, you know exactly how it feels. And he did that for you. As it goes on, in verse 32, it says, those that were crucified with him reviled him. That means they're insulting him. Now think about this, all right? Think about this. All right, so if you were on the cross back then, there's a few different ways that your body would be. It'd either be spread out, legs down, arms out, kind of like what we see in pictures, medieval type pictures and all, or your legs would be up and your hands would be up here, or a combination. And so either way, when you're up there, you can't breathe much. So can you imagine, while you're not breathing much, you're finding enough words to insult somebody else? To me, because if I can't breathe, and I've ran many a times, and when I'm done running, I'm trying to take a breath. I don't care about anybody else. I remember running a mile relay, and after I'd run, I was the first leg I'd finish, and I did, the guys can finish because I'm hurting, and I wouldn't even cheer for the guys. I was just trying to recover. These guys are feeling that same way, worse than that, but they're thinking of ways they can insult Jesus. And he sits there, and he's hanging on the cross, and he does it for you because he values you. He even says, in verse 34, he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? He felt like God's left him. He did it for you. And then it says in verse 37 that he breathed his last. He died. And once again, it's because his value in you.
That's right.
Here in this day and time, we're looking for someone to rescue us. And we've got the greatest rescuer ever.
Amen.
In the whole universe. Before time and when time ends, and in between, we've got the greatest. All we have to do is just follow. And one of the things I think is amazing, if you go over Revelation, look at Revelation 19. Revelation 19, we're looking for someone to rescue us. And here this book is written to encourage the church to stay faithful during tough times. And in a time period when Rome was going to lay siege and really do some damage to the church, he says, all right, I'm here to tell you, you hang on because it's going to get better. And then he describes in chapter 19 what we're going to talk about. It says in verse 11, and I saw heaven open, behold, a white horse. The one sitting on it is called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. His eyes were like a flame of fire, and on his head were many diadems. And in his name was written that no one knows but himself. And in verse 13, he is clothed in a robe dipped in blood. The name by which he is called is the Word of God. We know this is, you're talking about Jesus here. It says his robe is dipped in blood. Now that's an interesting thing. It's dipped in blood, and then look in verse 14. The armies of heaven arrayed in fine linen, white and pure. And that stands in verse 8 for the deeds that were done. Those good deeds that were done. Well, see, the followers are white. They're dressed in white. He's red. It's blood red. And it says, they were following him on white horses. So they're dressed in white, riding on white horses. Here he comes on a white horse, but he's covered in blood. And then it says, and from his mouth, in verse 15, comes a sharp sword by which to strike down the nations. And he'll rule them with a rod of iron. And he will tread the winepress with fury of God the Almighty. And on his robe and on his thigh, he has a name written, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. So now we know it's for sure Jesus. And so he's the one, and if you get this image in your head, you think about it, as he's going through, he's the one that's got the sword. He's got blood drenched on him. And everybody else is following him is pure and white. He's protected them from it all. He's the one that's rescuing. He's the one that's slaying everything. He's the one that's taken Satan out. And all you have to do is just follow him. Because he's won the battle. He's taken care of everything. That's what we have. You know, Disney says, you know, everything ends with the night and happily ever after. This is the white knight.
That's right.
This is the one we've been waiting for.
That's right.
He's here. He's come. And he said, you know what? In John chapter 14, 1 through 4, he says, if I go, and I'm telling you, I'm going to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I'm going to take you with me.
That's right.
He's coming. We just have to make sure we're ready. Because we have a God that's so in love with us. He created a plan to get us with him. And he came at just the right exact time. And he has set you up in the right time, in the right place, for you to reach out to him, even though he's not far from us. Not far from any of us. But what are you going to do about it? What is it going to be? Is this just going to be one of these Thursday night summer series lessons and someone goes away like, yeah, we got to meet a couple folks and then we go on? Well, we had a chance to eat a little bit. Or are we going to sit there and take the challenge to look at what he says? Because he says, if you want a love letter, man, this is it. He says, I'm in love with you. I've written all this for you. You know, I remember when I was in high school. No, not high school. When you hear this, you'll know what high school. I had a sack lunch that I'd bring every day. And it was peanut butter and jelly. Because that was, you know, kind of sweet, so I kind of liked it. And so I had peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but I didn't know how to make it. I had peanut butter on one side and jelly on the other. Now at home, that kind of works pretty good. But I didn't realize if you take it in a brown paper bag, by lunchtime, the jelly's kind of all the way through the bread. It's soggy. I didn't realize you need to put peanut butter on both sides and jelly in the middle, and then put it together. If I'd have known that, yeah, apparently some of you guys didn't know that. If you knew that, man, your sandwich is a whole lot better. Well, I remember getting my soggy sandwich. And I remember looking over, and I had an apple too, because that's kind of healthy. I look over at the guys over there, and man, they had one of those oatmeal cream-filled pies. And I'm thinking, that looks pretty good. And then somebody else had a Nutty Buddy. Everybody seemed to have little Debbie snacks. Like, man, those would be really good. So I tried to really talk about how great my little sandwich was. Oh man, it's peanut. You like peanut butter and jelly? Yeah. Well, it's a peanut butter. Oh, it's a great peanut butter. I put a lot of jelly in it. It's great. You want one? And they just look at that one side that had kind of like a purple look through the bread that was soaked through. And they did, no, seriously. I'll trade you this it's a whole sandwich for that little bitty oatmeal cream pie. I never got anybody to take that deal. Never once. You know why? It's because they value that oatmeal cream pie so much. No, they weren't even a conversation. We need to have that value to God because that's how he feels about us. There's nothing in the world that he's going to do to trade you. He's in love with you.
That's right.
He delights in you. He's made you exactly the way he wanted you. You came out perfect. And so the challenge for us is get in his word and see what other amazing things he's got for you if you follow. And so let us have a prayer. Dear Father, thank you so much for allowing us to have a chance to come together. I know in Texas and across the nation, across the world, there's a lot of fears and a lot of concerns. And Father, help this virus to pass on through and to die down and the infections to decrease rapidly. But through all this, help us to have comfort in you. Help us to know that you're the one that values us more than anything. And help us to get our confidence from you. Help us to dive into your word more and spend more time talking to you. Help us to love you more every day. And help us to love you more tomorrow than we did today. And help the decisions that we make, help them to make you proud. And Father, help us to be grateful for all that you do, and all that you've done, and all that you're going to do tomorrow for us. It's in your Son's name we pray. And so I ask you, the invitation is get to his word. The other invitation is, if you have any questions about salvation, then get with one of us here. And let's talk about that. Let's have a study privately.
That's right.
To where you know exactly what you're doing instead of just getting wet. Or whatever. Let's stand and sing.
Your only Son, no sin to have.